stop acting obsolete and run the stroke, or I'll find someone with a spine. At 5:42 a.m. on line 4, Trent Voss leaned over the guarding rail of a 200-ton mechanical stamping press and threw the words down like bolts. The plant floor carried that hour's usual soundtrack. Forklift beepers in the distance, compressed air hiss from the tool crib, the low rotating hum of flywheels waking up for first shift. But his voice cut through all of it. Kelly Dixon kept both gloved hands on the open electrical panel and did not answer him right away. She watched the safety relay module instead. One red fault LED stayed lit, while 2 green channel indicators flickered out of sync. By 6:03 a.m., that same line would be dark. One worker would be in surgery, and the quarter's bonus math would blow up in front of finance, operations, and corporate risk on a conference call no one wanted to join. At 5:42, none of that had happened yet. At 5:42, the decision looked like a tiny one. Whether to respect a red indicator or bypass it for 40 minutes of schedule recovery. Kelly finally straightened and faced him through the cage opening. She was 41. Steel-toe boots, dusted with powdered lubricant, safety glasses, spotted from coolant mist, and 14 years into running high-tonnage stamping cells without a recordable incident on her badge. "My name is Kelly Dixon," she said, her tone flat enough to stop sounding like a defense and start sounding like a fact. "I run high-tonnage stamping cells. I make $96,000 a year because I catch failures before steel turns into shrapnel." Voss smiled the way people smiled when they thought mockery counted as management. Clean hard hat, fresh reflective vest with no scuffs, tablet tucked under his arm with the morning attainment dashboard glowing green and yellow bars. "You make 96 because we've tolerated your pace," he said. "You're not a hero. You're acting lazy. This is a nuisance fault." Kelly turned back to the relay and tapped the housing with one finger. The panel-mounted unit sat between the dual-palm anti-tie-down controller and the clutch/brake safety chain. It was the logic gate that forced agreement between conditions. Both palm buttons within a strict time window, guard doors closed, light curtain clear, e-stop loop healthy. No agreement, no stroke. That was the design. Not elegant, not glamorous, just stubborn. She respected stubborn systems. They did not care about overtime, personalities, or production bonuses. A minute earlier, she'd heard intermittent e-stop chatter in the control loop, a quick in-and-out click like a relay, trying to decide if reality was stable. She had popped the panel and found 2 things that mattered. One terminal with heat discoloration, and one short run of insulation near the guard circuit with tiny vibration cracks, spidered along the bend radius. Hardware degradation, not software noise. In her line of work, that distinction was the whole game. "Look at this," she said. "Terminal 14 is heat marked. Guard loop insulation is fractured. The relay fault is persistent. If we run and this circuit drops asynchronously, you can get an unintended clutch engagement." Voss gave a dismissive shrug. "It's just a sensor tantrum." "It's not a sensor." She pointed at the wire jacket again. "It's integrity loss in the guard circuit." He shifted his weight, fingers drumming the rail. "Line 4 is 28 minutes behind before first break. Shipping has 2 trailers scheduled by noon. Corporate is already in my inbox about OEE. I'm not eating that because you saw a red light and panicked." Around them, crew from the adjacent line pretended not to listen and listened anyway. Everybody knew the rhythm: manager pressure, operator judgment, a line between them that either held or didn't. Mateo Ruiz stood by the decoiler with a coil hook in hand, younger than the rest of the team, 6 months in, trying to look busy in the way new operators did when conflict climbed above their pay grade. He glanced at Kelly, then at Voss, then back to the strip feed as if alignment marks could save him from choosing sides. Kelly stepped out of the panel area and closed the door. She latched it, checked the latch, then turned the key and pocketed it. I'm calling maintenance for a hard check and lockout. We verify continuity, replace that section, retest the safety chain, then run. Voss laughed once, short and sharp. No, you're going to run one stroke and prove your dramatic theory wrong. Cannot do that. Cannot or won't. Both. His face hardened. Do your job. I am doing it. He dropped his tablet onto the rail and leaned in closer, lowering his voice into that practiced tone managers used when they wanted menace to sound procedural. Kelly, listen carefully. You're becoming obsolete on my floor. Every week you have another reason we can't move. First moisture in a connector, then vibration in a bearing, now this. You're not protecting people. You're protecting your comfort. She felt the familiar flash of anger, hot and quick, then shoved it down where it couldn't steer her. The rule was simple. No decision made from humiliation ever improved machine safety. She met his stare. I'm protecting whoever stands at that station when the ram comes down. This press has run for 11 years. Metal fatigue has run for 11 years too. For 3 seconds, neither moved. The flywheel coasted down in the background with a descending tone, as if the machine itself were listening. 2 electricians passed the aisle entrance, saw Voss's posture, and kept walking. In industrial plants, hierarchy had a body language all its own. Voss straightened and raised his voice so the nearby stations could hear. You hear that? She thinks this machine is waiting to explode because of a cracked jacket the width of a hair. Kelly answered at the same volume. No, I think fault diagnostics are telling us the interlock chain is unstable. Same thing, fear in technical language. He pointed at her chest badge. Cowardice with credentials. Mateo's shoulders tightened. One of the material handlers froze with a pallet jack halfway through a turn. Kelly took one slow breath through the dust filter mask hanging at her neck and clipped it back in place. She was not going to give him the performance he wanted. You can call me whatever you need, she said. The relay still says no stroke. He slapped the guarding rail with an open palm. I'm the production manager on this floor. I make the call. You manage schedule, she replied. The relay manages permission. That line landed harder than a shout would have. Voss's ears reddened. He grabbed the HMI pendant, tapped through diagnostics, and stabbed a finger at the alarm list, as if force could rewrite categories. Guard circuit fault, safety relay channel mismatch, e-stop loop fluctuation. He scrolled, found no quick reset path, and tossed the pendant onto the console tray. Fine, he said. If you won't run it, I'll find someone who will. Kelly did not look away. Anyone who runs it with that fault owns what follows. You threatening me now. Warning you. Same difference. No, a threat is personal. This is mechanical. The 2 words hung there, personal and mechanical, because everybody on that floor knew which one won in the end. Physics had no interest in arguments. It only waited for conditions. At 5:49 a.m., 7 minutes after the first insult, Voss made a show of checking his watch. Clock is burning. You've turned a 10-minute hiccup into a production event. she answered. The event already exists. You just don't like its timing. He paced one lap along the guard perimeter, then stopped at the panel Kelly had locked. Key. No. Direct order. Hand me the key. No. Last chance. She held his gaze and kept her voice steady enough that even Mateo could hear the protocol inside it. Lockout/tagout applies when safety circuit integrity is compromised. Policy 7.3.6. If management disputes operator lockout, maintenance supervisor and safety coordinator review before restart. That's the path. Voss smiled again, thinner this time. Policy is guidance. Production is reality. Policy is reality written down after someone got hurt. That silenced even the nearest conveyors for half a beat. Or maybe it only felt that way. The overhead LEDs buzzed faintly. Somewhere down line 2, a pneumatic press fired 3 quick hits in sequence. The smell of machine oil and ozone sat heavy at nose level, familiar and metallic. He moved close enough that his vest brushed the rail. You know what your problem is, Kelly? You think years on a machine makes you untouchable. It makes you rigid. That's why people like you get replaced. Her jaw flexed, then settled. Maybe. But until replacement learns to read a failing safety chain, replacement should not run this press. Voss grabbed his tablet and tapped rapidly, likely documenting operator refusal in whatever internal form turned conflict into HR language. Then he looked up and delivered the line in a crisp cadence meant for witnesses. You are suspended pending review for insubordination and failure to execute assigned production tasks. The words hit harder than she expected, not because she doubted his willingness, but because she had trained half the people on that aisle, including the one now staring at the floor in front of the decoiler. A suspension meant badge deactivation, escorted waiting area, paperwork, and the rumor mill by lunch. It also meant someone else would be pushed into her station under pressure. She unclipped her radio, set it on the console, and handed over her access card without a flourish. Document this too, she said. Operator identified hardware fault in guard circuit, refused unsafe restart, requested maintenance verification under lockout procedure. He took the card and did not answer. As security was called from the front office, Kelly looked once more at the panel seam where the relay sat behind steel and plastic, still lit red in her mind, even through the closed door. A single indicator did not look dramatic. That was the trap. Catastrophe rarely announced itself with theatrical signs. Most days it arrived as one stubborn warning interpreted by the wrong person under the wrong incentive. When the security officer reached line 4 and asked her to step away from the cell, she went without resistance. Voss was already waving maintenance over with 2 fingers, talking fast, pointing at the panel, then at the tacked time board. Kelly could not hear the words from that distance, but she knew the structure. Minimize. Override. Move. At the aisle turn, she paused and looked back through the guard mesh. The dual palm controls were still in place. The light curtain still stood in front of the die area. The safety relay still controlled whether those systems had to agree before motion. Objective truth was still present on that floor. The only variable was whether anyone would permit it to stay in charge. To understand why that one red LED mattered, the clock had to roll back 8 minutes. 8 minutes earlier, Kelly was still inside the cage with her lock key clipped to her belt and the startup checklist folded in the back pocket of her coveralls, walking the perimeter in the same order she had used for years, because routine prevented blind spots. She started at the stock reel, checked coil strap removal, verified feed straightener rollers, then moved to the die area where the upper shoe sat at top dead center, and the lower die looked clean under the task lights. Coolant mist from the neighboring line drifted in a thin haze, carrying that sweet metal smell of soluble oil and warm steel. Line 4 was scheduled for a run of galvanized side panel blanks, 2.6 millimeter stock, medium draw, nothing exotic if the machine stayed inside its design rules. She put a gloved hand on the guarding post and felt the faint vibration of the flywheel drive idling low, steady, ordinary. Her startup sequence had 5 non-negotiable gates: visual, mechanical, control, safety, then dry cycle. Visual meant checking for loose hardware, cracked guarding, die clearance. Mechanical meant clutch/brake air pressure, lubrication level, and feed timing marks. Control meant HMI alarms clear and mode selection correct. Safety meant dual palm anti-tie-down test, light curtain interruption test, guard door interlock test, and emergency stop continuity check. Dry cycle meant 1-inch stroke with no strip and no personnel in the hazard zone. Most operators compressed those steps when management was pacing behind them. Kelly never compressed them because every shortcut simply borrowed risk at interest. At 5:41:06, she hit the main control enable and listened. The machine gave her the usual relay sequence clicks, then one extra chatter from the safety stack inside the panel, a staccato tick-tick that lasted less than a second. She paused with her thumb still near the reset soft key. The HMI flashed a yellow advisory and cleared too quickly to log on the summary bar. She opened the diagnostics page and watched the safety status bits refresh. Channel A showed stable. Channel B flickered once from true to false and back. She did not run anything yet. She waited, eyes on the bit table, counting 10 seconds in her head while the fluorescent lights hummed over the cell. At 5:41:24, the red LED on the safety relay came on and stayed on. It was not bright, just a narrow jewel of red and a row of module indicators, but the pattern around it told the story. Green input channels were not matching. The relay's fault output had latched, which meant the internal logic had detected disagreement in the monitored circuit. Kelly leaned closer, then checked the printed I/O legend taped inside the cabinet door. Guard loop and e-stop loop fed into that relay through separate channels so the module could detect shorts, opens, and cross faults. If both channels did not change state exactly the way they were designed to change, the relay blocked clutch permission. That block was not a nuisance. That block was the point. She ran the first safety test anyway because confirmation mattered more than intuition. She reset faults, then pressed left and right palm buttons sequentially, intentionally out of sync. The anti-tie-down should reject that, and it did. She reset again and pressed both within the allowed window. The relay should clear an arm for a stroke request. It did not. Red stayed lit. She moved to the light curtain, passed a test card through the beams, and watched the status line. Interruption registered correctly, then returned with a brief drop on channel B once the beam restored. Intermittent. Not dead, not healthy. Intermittent was worse in some ways because intermittent defects created false confidence between failures. Line 4 status came over radio from dispatch, voice clipped and impatient. Kelly keyed up without taking her eyes off the relay. Line 4 in safety diagnostics, hold start. Copy diagnostics, need estimate in 2. Unknown until continuity check, she said and clipped the radio back. At 5:41:58, she cut control power and opened the cabinet. Warm electrical air hit her face, dry and sharp with that faint varnish smell from transformers. She traced the guard circuit harness from terminal strip to conduit entry. Most of the insulation looked intact, but at the cabinet hinge side, where vibration and opening cycles always concentrated strain, the outer jacket had fine radial cracks. She bent the bundle gently with insulated fingers and saw one crack widen just enough to reveal a thin line of copper beneath. Not a full break, not yet. A near failure point. Then she checked terminal torque with a screwdriver and found terminal 14 discolored brown at the edge, heat marked from resistance. Resistance made heat. Heat accelerated insulation breakdown. Breakdown created intermittent opens. Intermittent opens created unpredictable channel states. The chain was straight and ugly. She pulled her phone from her pocket, switched to plant camera mode, and took 3 photos. Terminal strip close-up with label visible, cracked insulation at bend radius, relay module with red fault lit. Evidence first, arguments later. She tagged the images with line number and timestamp so they would auto-save into the maintenance ticket thread. Then she called maintenance on the dedicated channel. Maintenance lead, this is Dixon on line 4. I need electrical at cell panel now. Safety relay fault latched, channel mismatch, visible insulation degradation and heat on 14. There was a second of static, then Jalen Mercer answered, already moving from the sound of his breathing. Copy, 2 minutes out. Do not reset run. Affirmative. Locking pending your verification. She closed the panel halfway, not latched, and stood where she could see both the relay and the die space. Her pulse was up, not from fear, from concentration. She had seen presses fail in different ways across 14 years. Clutch solenoid sticking, feeder overdriving stock, scrap slug stacking under the draw station, ram jib clearance, drifting out of tolerance. Safety chain instability was its own category because it touched permission, timing, and trust all at once. On a 200-ton mechanical press at 32 strokes per minute, each full cycle took 1.875 seconds. The machine did not move slowly enough for correction mid-thought. If permission occurred at the wrong instant, the ram still delivered energy, whether the die was ready or not. Steel did not care why conditions were wrong. By 5:42 exactly, Jalen stepped into the cell with his meter bag, hard hat lamp still on from a service call in the utility corridor. He nodded once at Kelly and crouched by the open cabinet. Show me, she pointed in order. Relay fault persistent. Channel B flicker during restore. Terminal 14 heat marked. Harness crack at hinge radius. Heard e-stop chatter on power up. He put probes on the terminal strip and ran continuity while flexing the harness section she had flagged. The meter tone dropped out twice in 10 seconds. He repeated it to confirm, then switched to voltage check under control power. You're right, he said. Intermittent open under vibration. Could also have partial short to ground if jacket rubs through conduit lip. Kelly asked, repair scope? Cut and replace this run. New ferrule on 14. Inspect upstream at guard door junction box. Best case 35 minutes. Worst case an hour if we find conductor damage in conduit. She nodded. Lockout and tag out now. Jalen looked toward the aisle where foot traffic was thickening with first shift arrivals. You know he's going to fight that. He can fight me, Kelly said. "He can't fight the meter." Jalen gave a tight, humorless half smile and started filling the quick ticket on his handheld. He selected safety circuit fault from the priority menu, then added free text. Intermittent continuity loss observed under harness movement, thermal discoloration at terminal, line hold required pending repair and retest. Kelly watched the words appear because wording mattered. Ambiguity became loopholes later. At 5:42:27, she performed a physical check that most people skipped because it required kneeling on concrete. She traced the guard loop conduit down behind the cabinet and found a clamp loose by half a turn. The conduit had been vibrating against the bracket, enough to polish a bright wear mark into the paint. That explained the crack pattern. It also meant this had been developing over weeks, maybe months, hidden by motion and noise, until the relay logic had enough evidence to refuse operation. Safety devices did not fail suddenly as often as people claimed. They failed slowly while production looked normal, then finally told the truth on a morning when schedule pressure was high. She stood, wiped dust from her glove, and ran one more diagnostic thought experiment the way she always did, before making a hard stop call. If they ignored the fault and the channel dropped during a clutch command, what were the plausible outcomes? Best case, nuisance trip and downtime. Mid case, partial cycle with die misfeed, tool damage. Worst case, asynchronous permission with an unintended downstroke, off-index strike, die fracture, fragment ejection. She did not need dramatics to rank risk. Probability multiplied by consequence did the math by itself. With exposed signs of heat and insulation failure, consequence dominated. From the far side of the guardrail, a junior material handler asked, "Kelly, are we starting or holding?" "Dispatch is asking." "Holding," she said. "Tell them electrical safety fault." He hesitated, then nodded and relayed it down the aisle. At 5:42, before he reached the gate, Trent Voss called from the aisle, "Restart it and give me one stroke." At 5:42:44, Trent Voss appeared at the cell entrance carrying his tablet and that expression of brisk irritation he wore when data stopped matching plan. His vest was still clean, his boots still free of floor dust. He glanced at Jalen's open meter, then at Kelly's hand on the panel door. "What is this now?" he asked. Kelly answered in the same even tone she used with auditors and apprentices. "Safety relay fault with intermittent guard loop continuity. Visible harness degradation and heated terminal. Line is locked pending repair and retest." Voss looked past her into the cabinet as if looking longer could change what components reported. "We had no issue yesterday." "Degradation is progressive," Kelly said. "Yesterday's absence of alarm does not clear today's fault," Jalen added without looking up. "Meter drops when harness flexes. I've got it on record." Voss exhaled through his nose, impatient. "How long?" 35 to 60 minutes if no hidden damage," Jalen said. "Not acceptable," Voss replied. "We are already behind." Kelly kept her eyes on the relay, not on him. Red still lit. "Then we stay behind safely." He tapped at his tablet, likely opening the live attainment dashboard that translated minutes into red bars and emails. "Could be a nuisance." Kelly shook her head once. "Nuisance faults do not heat terminals." That line landed on the small group now within earshot. An electrician at the aisle corner, Mateo near the decoiler, one forklift operator idling long enough to listen. Kelly felt the shift in attention and disliked it. Safety decisions should not be theater. They should be procedure. But pressure always tried to convert procedure into opinion. Voss stepped closer to the panel and pointed at the relay. It's one light. It is one logic state that says unsafe to run, Kelly replied. The module compares channels for agreement, sequencing, and reset integrity. That red means it detected nonconformity in the circuit it is built to police. If we bypass that judgment, we're blind. He glanced at Jalen. Can you patch it temporary? Jalen answered carefully, choosing words that would survive a later transcript. Temporary bypass would remove validated guard loop supervision. I can repair. I cannot certify operation with a jump. Kelly heard the phrase and stored it. Not certify operation with a jump. Exact language mattered when memory got edited by fear or liability. The flywheel motor idled down another notch while they spoke, its tone falling a few hertz and then stabilizing. Overhead, the takt time board rolled from green to amber for line 4. Kelly watched Voss notice the color change from the corner of his eye. Numbers moved him more than mechanisms did. She had seen that pattern for years and never once seen it improve safety outcomes. At 5:43:12, she made the lockout call formal. She pulled the lock body from her belt, fed it through the disconnect hasp, snapped it closed, and hung the red tag with her name, badge number, and reason code. Safety circuit integrity failure. She read it aloud as she wrote, an old habit from training days. Do not energize. Verified by operator and maintenance pending corrective action. Jalen countersigned beneath her entry and attached his own maintenance tag to the cabinet latch. For a moment, the cell looked frozen in a clean, lawful state. Power isolated, hazard identified, evidence captured, repair path defined. Kelly felt the narrow calm that came with procedure done correctly. It never lasted long when schedule pressure was hunting for exits, but it existed, and she respected it. Voss stared at the paired tags, then at the idle press behind the mesh. You're turning a startup delay into a plant event, he said. Kelly answered. The event started when insulation failed. We just recognized it. He did not reply. He did. He watched the red tag sway slightly in the airflow from the aisle fans, and Kelly could almost see his internal arithmetic building. Trailers, quotas, bonus thresholds, executive calls, blame lanes. Across from that arithmetic sat a heat-marked terminal and a cracked jacket that had already voted. The relay still showed red. The machine had told the truth. The argument was no longer technical. It was whether truth would be allowed to govern the next decision. Voss held her stare for a long second, then tapped the red tag with one finger as if it were a personal insult instead of a control measure. Take it off, he said. We'll run in setup mode, 1 inch at a time, and prove this is nothing. Kelly did not move her hands from the lock hasp. No, his jaw tightened. That was not a suggestion. It still violates the safety chain. She pointed into the panel opening where the relay sat. The relay is seeing channel disagreement. That means one side of the guard loop is unstable. If the loop state toggles during clutch permission, timing goes non-deterministic. On a mechanical press, non-deterministic timing is how you get an uncommanded downstroke. He gave a short laugh that carried no humor. You rehearsed that for dramatic effect? She answered in the same calm cadence. I've said it enough times because the mechanism hasn't changed. The clutch does not care if the command is intentional, accidental, or electrical noise. If permission appears, energy transfers. Jalen stayed crouched at the cabinet, meter leads still clipped, and added quietly, She's right about that. Voss swung toward him. I asked if you could patch this temporary. I said I can repair it, Jalen replied. A patch that defeats supervision is a bypass. Kelly watched Voss register that word and reject it. Managers under pressure didn't like vocabulary that created liability. He wanted a word that sounded procedural and temporary, something that would look harmless in a morning report. He turned back to her and lowered his voice to a tight, controlled tone. Kelly, listen carefully. Remove the lock, let maintenance bridge the fault long enough for startup, and we'll circle back on permanent repair at break. She shook her head once. Bridging the fault is bypassing the fault. You would be spoofing a healthy loop. The relay would stop seeing the unstable leg and we'd be running on a lie. At 5:43:36, a forklift rolled past the aisle with a stack of empty racks and a chain clinking against steel, and the operator slowed just enough to glance toward line 4. The plant had that early shift brightness where everything looked sharp under overhead LEDs, but the mood at the cage had gone dense and heavy. People were listening without appearing to listen. Voss spread his hands, impatient. You keep saying words like non-deterministic and spoofing, but I hear one thing. Delay. We need parts moving in the next 10 minutes. Kelly looked at the relay. Then she looked at him. Delay is measurable. Injury is measurable. Tooling loss is measurable. We already know which one costs more. He stepped close to the guardrail again. I am not debating philosophy on a shop floor. It isn't philosophy, she said. It's sequence logic. 2 channels must agree. Both palm inputs must time in window. Light curtain must be live. E-stop chain must be stable. Right now we have a provable fault in one channel and heat damage at a terminal. No stable sequence. No stroke. Run in single stroke with everyone clear. Single stroke still needs valid permission. Then manual inch. Manual inch still needs valid permission. You're hiding behind technicalities. She held his gaze. Those technicalities are why this plant has fewer funerals than it used to. That line landed hard enough that even the material handler at the aisle corner stopped pretending to check pallet labels. Voss's expression flattened. He had expected resistance. He had not expected public resistance with language that framed him against safety history. He pivoted to authority. Direct order, he said. Remove your lock and restart the machine. Kelly kept her tone even, but inside, anger and fear pressed against each other in a tight knot. Fear for Mateo, fear for whoever would stand at the station if she got removed, fear that procedure was about to lose to hierarchy in front of witnesses. Anger wanted to sharpen her voice. Discipline kept it flat. I refuse. Under Lockout Policy 7.3.6, disputed operator lockout requires safety coordinator review before re-energization. You know that. Policy is not a shield from insubordination. Policy is the minimum safe behavior. He leaned in. Do you understand what happens when production managers can't trust operators to execute? She answered. Do you understand what happens when operators stop trusting safety hardware? For 2 beats, neither spoke. The flywheel motor behind the cage gave a low rotational whine that rose and fell with idle control, and coolant pumps from line 3 pulsed in the background like distant surf. Jalen removed his probes, capped them, and stood, not leaving, but no longer pretending. This was still a normal troubleshooting task. Voss turned his head slightly toward the aisle and called out, Mateo, come here. Mateo approached with hesitant steps, gloves still tucked into his back pocket, eyes shifting between Kelly and the open cabinet. He stopped outside the gate and waited. Voss gestured toward Kelly's lock. You seeing this? We have a startup hold over a nuisance fault. Mateo swallowed. I saw the red light earlier. Kelly spoke to him directly, careful and precise. You also heard the continuity drop on Jalen's meter, intermittent guard loop, heat on terminal 14. This isn't cosmetic. Voss cut in. You are not briefing him. I am. Kelly ignored him for one sentence, because the sentence mattered. If someone asks you to run with bypassed safety supervision, that is not normal operation. Mateo's shoulders tightened further. I don't have authority to make that call. Exactly, Kelly said, which is why you don't accept it. Voss snapped. Enough. He pointed at her badge. You do not coach my crew against direct instruction on my floor. She faced him again. I'm coaching them to stay alive. The overhead tact board ticked to a new interval and line 4 shifted from amber toward red. A distant buzzer marked first shift roll call in assembly. By the first week of October, everyone in that plant could read pressure by color alone, and red cells drew managers like magnets. Voss lifted his tablet, opened a form, and read while typing. Operator refusal to execute assigned startup, disruptive conduct, escalation to immediate disciplinary review. He looked up. Last opportunity. Remove the lock. No. State reason for refusal. Documented guard loop integrity failure, thermal terminal damage, and relay channel mismatch with persistent fault. Restart would require bypassing validated safety supervision. I will not participate. He gave a thin smile. There it is. Hero speech. She did not answer that. She watched his thumb hover over the send button. Once he sent it, HR language would move faster than maintenance language. That was another shop floor law nobody wrote down. He pressed send. At 5:44:52, dispatch called on the wall radio asking for line 4 ETA again, and nobody answered for 3 full rings. Finally, Voss grabbed the handset and said, Line 4 delayed due to operator noncompliance. Implementing alternate staffing. He hung up before dispatch could respond. Kelly felt the knot in her chest pull tighter. Alternate staffing meant exactly what it always meant. Find the least empowered person, put them in front of the biggest risk, call it operational flexibility. She unclipped her own radio from her vest and set it on the console so no one could accuse her of interfering once discipline started. Then she stepped half a pace back from the disconnect, still inside the gate, still between Voss and the lock. He saw the movement and interpreted it as weakness. Good, he said. You're finally thinking clearly. I'm making sure there are witnesses, she replied. There are always witnesses. Then they can hear this too. If you energize through that fault, you own the outcome. His voice hardened. I own this floor. She answered, you own decisions. Physics owns outcomes. Jalen exhaled and rubbed a hand across his forehead. Trent, repair is 40 minutes. We can have it done before first break and avoid all of this. Voss did not even look at him. I am done discussing timelines with people who don't carry production accountability. He pointed toward the aisle. Go get me a jumper lead and update the ticket as temporary diagnostic bridge. Jalen froze. I'm not writing that if the intent is production. The intent is diagnostics, Kelly said. Diagnostics don't require strip feed and tact target. Voss ignored her and repeated slower. Get me a jumper lead. Jalen did not move for a second, then answered carefully. I can escalate to maintenance supervisor right now. Do it after you bring the lead. No, Jalen said, voice low but clear. I'll call supervisor now. For a brief moment, Kelly thought that might create a pause, maybe enough for safety to arrive and formalize the hold. But Voss pivoted faster than that. He opened his contacts and called HR from speaker, keeping his eyes on Kelly as the line rang. A voice answered, sleepy but professional. Human Resources, Dana speaking. This is Trent Voss, production manager, North Stamping. I need immediate suspension processing for operator Kelly Dixon, badge 4417, insubordination and refusal to perform assigned duties. Dana said, Is there an active safety dispute? There is an operator behavior dispute, causing production stoppage. Kelly stepped toward the phone and spoke clearly, not shouting. Active safety dispute. Documented electrical fault in guard loop. Maintenance witness present. Lockout in place under policy 7.3.6. Dana hesitated. I'll need EHS copied if lockout is involved. Voss cut across her. Copy whoever you need. I require replacement staffing now. He ended the call before Dana could ask more, then looked at Kelly with open contempt. You just made this formal. It already was formal when the relay latched fault. At 5:46:03, 2 more people drifted near the aisle mouth, pretending to check a parts cart while watching the cage. Mateo had not moved from his spot near the gate. His face showed what 6 months in a plant looked like when hierarchy and hazard collided. He knew enough to be worried, not enough to feel protected. Voss turned to him. You're taking the station? Mateo blinked. I haven't qualified on 200-ton yet. You've run 120 and 150. Controls are the same. Kelly stepped in. Before he could answer. No, they are not the same where failure energy is concerned. Die set mass is different. RAM energy is different. Reaction time requirements are different. Voss pointed a finger at her, voice rising. You are suspended. You do not issue technical directives, she replied. Then hear this as a safety statement for the record. Unqualified reassignment under active interlock fault is reckless. He ignored the content and grabbed the word he preferred. There's that drama again. Mateo spoke quietly. Sir, if maintenance says hold, maybe we hold. Voss swung toward him. Do you want this job? Mateo nodded once, uncertain. Then do what you're told. The line hung in the air, blunt and ugly. Kelly had heard variants for 14 years. Every bad event she remembered had one moment like this. Not a machine failure yet, not a bang, just a power statement that converted doubt into compliance. Jalen's phone buzzed with a call back from maintenance supervisor. He glanced at the screen and answered, stepping a few feet away but still audible. Yeah, I'm at line 4. Intermittent guard loop open, heat on terminal 14, lockout tagged. Production manager requesting jumper for diagnostic bridge while running. He listened, then said, Copy. I told him repair only. Voss barked, Put that on speaker. Jalen did not. He ended the call and said, Supervisor says, no bypass for production. Repair path stands. Your supervisor does not run this floor, Voss said. No, Jalen replied. He runs maintenance sign-off. For the first time, Voss looked genuinely boxed in, and that was when he reached for hierarchy above all local expertise. He opened the panel door himself, scanned the terminal strip with practiced unfamiliarity, then held out his hand without looking away. Key. Now. Kelly kept her hand at her side. No. Give me the key or hand me your badge and leave the cell. She unclipped her badge, placed it on the cabinet lip and said, You're choosing that, not me. He snatched it, then called toward the aisle. Security to line 4, immediate. Mateo flinched at the word security. The bystanders looked away in the synchronized manner of people who did not want to be drafted into a statement later. Kelly removed her lock key from her belt, held it for one breath, then placed it beside her radio on the console where cameras could see. "For record clarity," she said, "I am surrendering access under protest due to unsafe restart demand." Voss answered, "For record clarity, you are being removed for refusing work." She stepped back through the gate opening and stood in the marked safe aisle, palms visible, posture steady. Inside, she felt the tremor in her forearms that always came after an adrenaline surge. She hated this part. The handoff where competence lost official authority and danger stayed behind with whoever remained. At 5:47:31, security acknowledged over channel that an officer was en route from the front corridor. The response time sounded routine. The risk profile on line 4 was anything but routine. Voss picked up Kelly's badge, clipped it into his own vest pocket, and turned to Mateo. "Get your gloves on, you're up." Mateo looked once at Kelly. She met his eyes and gave him the only instruction she could still deliver without words. "Do not pretend confidence you do not have." He nodded faintly, then pulled his gloves on anyway. Kelly saw the motion and felt the worst part of shop floor fear settle in her chest. Not panic, not noise, just the quiet certainty that procedure had been replaced by obedience. Trent Voss swung the gate wider and motioned Mateo into the operator zone with a sharp flick of his hand. "Station up," he said. "Eyes on me, not on her." Mateo stepped in, shoulders tight, and took position at the control pedestal as if standing in a borrowed uniform. Jalen stayed by the cabinet, jaw set, meter bag still open at his boots. Voss turned to him next. "Diagnostic bridge. Now," Jalen answered. "Repair only." Voss did not blink. "Then step out of my cell." At 5:47:58, the security officer reached line 4 and said Kelly's name in a neutral tone that sounded rehearsed from 100 smaller disputes. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." Kelly kept her eyes on the open panel. "He is about to bypass a live safety fault." The officer glanced toward Voss, who answered first. "Disciplinary action in progress. Escort her." Kelly stepped back when the officer gestured again. She did not resist. She also did not stop talking. "For record, unauthorized bypass under active guard loop instability." She said it clearly, facing the nearest ceiling camera. Voss barked a laugh and reached into Jalen's bag without permission, pulling out a short, insulated jumper lead with alligator ends. Jalen grabbed his wrist. "Don't do that." Voss jerked free. "You're relieved from this station." Jalen looked at Kelly once, then pulled his hand back and said loud enough for witnesses, "I do not approve this operation." By 5:48 a.m., first shift traffic had thickened around the aisle mouths, and the attention on line 4 had the charged stillness of a storm front. People kept moving, but slower. Forklift tires squeaked against sealed concrete. A pallet jack clattered over a floor seam. Nobody came close enough to intervene. Kelly let the officer guide her to the yellow-marked pedestrian lane. She walked 3 steps, then looked over her shoulder through the guard mesh. Voss had leaned into the cabinet and clipped one end of the jumper to a lower guard loop terminal while leaving the opposite end loose in his hand, staged but not yet bridged, like a threat waiting for timing. He did it with awkward hands and false confidence, the way someone types admin commands in a system he does not understand. Mateo watched the lead go in and then looked at the relay module. The red LED stayed latched. Channel lights still flickered out of sync. Nothing healthy, nothing resolved. Kelly stopped walking. "You saw that," she said to the officer. "He is setting up to defeat supervision." The officer kept his tone careful. "I'm not authorized on machine controls." "Then call EHS now." He keyed his shoulder radio and relayed a short request for environmental health and safety presence at line 4. No urgency code, no hold order, just a request in queue with morning traffic. Kelly resumed walking because standing still changed nothing. At the supervisor station near the HR corridor, the officer asked her to wait on a metal bench until HR could process suspension paperwork. The station sat 40 yards from line 4 with a diagonal sight line through 2 bays of mesh and conveyor frames. She could still hear the press area over ambient plant noise. Not every word, enough to track sequence. She took out her phone, opened the photos she had captured, and sent them to EHS coordinator Lena Patel with one line: "Active bypass staged by production manager at line 4 after lockout dispute." She attached timestamps and hit send. Read receipt did not appear. At 5:49:22, she heard Voss on channel 3 from a wall speaker near the station. "Line 4 restoring from temporary diagnostic bridge. Startup in progress." The phrasing was surgical and dishonest. Temporary diagnostic bridge. Not bypass, not override, not defeated safety. She typed the exact phrase into her notes app and saved it. Across the floor, Jalen had not left entirely. He stood at the outer rail with his arms folded, face hard, watching like a man counting down to an impact. He could not stop. Mateo stayed at the pedestal, left glove resting near the selector switch, Edger right hand hovering over the inch button. Voss stood behind his right shoulder, too close, one hand on the rail, one hand gripping his tablet like a shield. "You'll do exactly what I say," he told Mateo. "No freelance." Mateo nodded without turning. At 5:50, dispatch asked for confirmation that light curtain and palms had been verified post-fault. Voss answered, "Verified for controlled restart." Jalen muttered something Kelly could not hear, then keyed his own radio. "Maintenance has not signed off repair." Voss snapped back over comms, "Maintenance note pending. We are in diagnostics." That exchange lasted 6 seconds, and then disappeared into other line traffic. But the consequence had already started. Words were being stacked in systems that insurers and regulators would eventually read, line by line. Voss climbed inside the cage and pointed at the die space. "Clear check." Mateo did a visual sweep with a flashlight, beam bouncing off polished die surfaces and guideposts. The upper shoe sat high, clean. Lower die looked open. Feed strip tail was threaded to first station. No human body inside hazard zone. "Clear," Mateo said. "Then lock gate," Voss ordered. Mateo closed the gate. The magnetic interlock called for a stable guard loop and did not get one. The red relay stayed faulted, forcing them into a waiting state while Voss stared at the cabinet like pressure alone could coerce logic. Kelly felt her fingers press into her own palms as if pressure could transmit through distance and stop the next command. By 5:52, HR still had not arrived. The officer made a second call. "I have Dixon waiting. Need handoff." He got a hold message and looked apologetic without saying it. Kelly did not care about apology. She cared about sequence. On line 4, Voss switched the mode selector to setup and told Mateo to run one manual inch cycle with no feed advance. "Just bump it." Mateo pressed and released. The clutch did not take. The command dropped against the fault chain, and the ram did not move. Voss's jaw tightened. He tapped the panel, checked the relay face, and said nothing for a beat that felt longer than it was. Then he looked toward the aisle and lifted one hand as if delay itself were someone else's error. Jalen answered from outside the rail. Intermittent faults pass until they don't. Voss ignored him. At 5:55, a maintenance clerk walked by carrying a tablet and paused when Voss called him over. Kelly watched from the bench as Voss dictated in clipped phrases, pointing to the cabinet. The clerk typed, nodded, and read back. Event code, sensor anomaly, action, temporary diagnostic bridge staged for continuity confirmation. Jalen stepped forward. Add this. No maintenance approval for production run. The clerk hesitated, eyes shifting between them. Voss said, Put maintenance follow-up scheduled at 10 o'clock. That is all. The clerk entered exactly that and left. Paperwork had now been bent to match command. No explosion yet, no crash yet, but the legal fuse had been lit in plain view. At 5:58, Lena finally replied to Kelly's message with 2 words. On my way. Kelly sent back, Hurry. She stood and moved to the edge of the yellow line for a better sight line. The officer asked her to stay behind the marker. She did, but only barely. On line 4, Voss moved through screens from setup toward single stroke and ordered feed engaged as soon as permissives cleared. Mateo reached for the feeder controls and paused at the alignment camera readout. Pilot marks look off, he said. Voss leaned in. How far? Mateo toggled zoom, swallowed, and answered. About 11 millimeters left on strip center line. Kelly closed her eyes for 1 beat, then opened them. 11 millimeters on that die set meant the punch faces would contact outside designed load path if the strip indexed wrong. Correct it, Mateo said almost to himself. Voss answered, We correct after first hit. We need motion now. That can chip inserts, Mateo said. 1 stroke, Voss repeated, then adjust. At 6:01:15, Voss finally made the physical bridge. He reached into the cabinet and clipped the free alligator end across the faulted guard loop terminals, closing the gap he had staged 13 minutes earlier. The red relay LED dropped out. Both green channels lit steady. A lie had just been translated into healthy. At 6:01:48, Voss walked the perimeter once, confirming nobody stood in the immediate hazard zone, then signaled Mateo to proceed. At 6:02:03, first manual inch with feed held looked normal. That was how bad decisions bought credibility. One safe-looking result under unstable conditions. Voss immediately escalated. Single stroke, do it. Mateo hesitated, hand above the command. Light curtain should be live for this mode. Voss tapped the HMI. It is satisfied. He did not say muted under bypass. He did not need to. The screen gave him the answer he wanted because the jumper had rewritten what safe meant. Kelly heard the flywheel tone rise through 2 bays of machinery, a smooth climb from idle to working speed that every press operator recognized in bone and teeth. The sound drew workers' eyes from nearby stations, then sent most of them looking away again. At 6:02:21, Mateo keyed feed jog, trying to center the strip. It shifted, then bounced back, still cross-fed. Still off, he said. Voss checked his watch. 1 more stroke. I want to re-index, Mateo replied. 1 more stroke, Voss repeated harder now. Then we're done arguing. The dread on Kelly's bench turned physical. Her hearing narrowed around line 4. Conveyor rumble thinned. Overhead fans faded. What remained was flywheel rise, clutch air hiss, and Voss's voice cutting commands into a machine state that had already been compromised. At 6:02:29, Matteo pressed the stroke command. Nothing happened for an instant because the clutch timing window had just passed. He released, looked confused, and reached again. Voss barked. Hold it now." Matteo pressed and held. 8 seconds later, the ram came down on an empty timing window while the strip sat skewed. The upper die hit off-axis with a flat metallic detonation that punched through ear protection and seemed to fold the room in half. The sound was not a bang, so much as a hard, violent crack, followed by a tearing scream of steel sliding, where steel was never meant to slide. Kelly flinched at the bench as the guard mesh shuddered. Inside the press, a row of carbide inserts fractured and burst free like shrapnel from a snapped cutter head. One fragment struck the inside of the guarding and ricocheted downward. Another shot through an opening near the feed throat and hit Matteo high in the shoulder, spinning him sideways off his stance. A second fragment grazed his neck, and he dropped backward against the pedestal, hands clutching at his upper chest with shock on his face, too startled to yell for the first beat. Hydraulic mist atomized from a ruptured line into a gray-white cloud that flooded the cage and caught the overhead lights in dirty halos. Voss froze for a fraction, tablet hanging at his side, then started shouting 3 orders at once. E-stop! Kill main! Get him out! He lunged toward the e-stop mushroom near the gate, even though the line had already begun tripping itself. Alarms stacked in rapid sequence. Press fault horn, line stop siren, feeder overload tone. Then the broader plant annunciator for emergency medical response. The flywheel decelerated with a descending mechanical howl that rattled the railings. Gravity took over inside the die area as broken pieces settled, pinging and clattering across the lower shoe. Jalen was moving before the second alarm cycle finished. He vaulted the outer rail gap to the emergency access point, hit the main disconnect, and shouted to nearby crew, "Medkit and trauma team now." 2 operators from Line 3 ran in with spill pads and a first aid bag. Security at Kelly's station grabbed his radio and called code to medical with exact location and injury type. Fragment strike, conscious, breathing. Kelly was already moving despite the officer reaching for her sleeve. "I'm first responder certified," she said and kept going. He let go and followed. At the gate, haze and burnt oil smell hit her hard. Matteo was on the floor against the pedestal base, face pale, breathing fast, eyes wide and unfocused. He kept trying to push himself up. Kelly dropped to one knee beside him and put a steady hand on his forearm. "Stay down, look at me, keep breathing." He stared at her, then at the clouded die space behind her and whispered, "It fired wrong." "I know," she said, "you're with me." Jalen applied pressure dressings to shoulder and neck, while Kelly stabilized Matteo's posture and kept him from twisting. Voss hovered 2 steps away, speaking into his phone with a shaking voice that tried to sound in control. "Industrial accident on line 4. Send ambulance. Possible tooling failure." He did not mention the jumper. The cabinet door still hung open behind him with the bypass clip plainly visible. Lena Patel arrived at a run with EHS binder under her arm, took one look at the panel and stopped dead for half a second. Then she pointed at the cabinet and said to security, "Photograph that now. Do not touch anything." She turned to Voss. "Who authorized this bridge?" Voss opened his mouth, closed it, and looked toward the floor where Matteo lay. Sirens from the plant gate grew louder outside, then closer, then stopped at the bay doors as the medical team rushed in with a stretcher. By 6:03 a.m., Line 4 was dark end to end. The 200-ton press stood silent in a fog of mist and alarm light, and every person in that aisle understood that the argument from 20 minutes earlier had just been settled by force, steel, and timing. The medical team dropped to their knees beside Matteo while the line alarms still pulsed, and Kelly stayed in place until the lead paramedic met her eyes and said, "Talk me through mechanism." She pointed without touching anything. Off-axis strike after crossfeed, die fragmented, one shoulder impact from ricochet, one neck graze. He stayed conscious. The paramedic nodded once, cut away fabric around the strike zone, and called out vitals in clipped numbers to the recorder. Matteo's breathing came fast and shallow, but he answered orientation questions. And that was the first narrow piece of good news anybody got. Lena stood at the open cabinet with security, directing photos from 3 angles: jumper placement, terminal strip labels, relay face, and the timestamp display on the HMI. "Do not pull that lead yet," she said. "Chain of custody starts now." Voss took one step forward and stopped when she lifted her hand without looking at him. "You speak after we secure scene integrity." Within 4 minutes, the stretcher rolled toward the bay doors, and the sirens started again, fading into the loading corridor. The aisle went from noise to a heavy mechanical quiet, broken only by ventilation fans and the dying whine of decelerated drives. Kelly wiped coolant mist off her glasses and watched Lena place a red evidence seal across the panel door. The sticker looked small against all that steel, but she had seen those seals decide careers and lawsuits. Jalen handed over his handheld meter with logged continuity drops still in memory and said, "I want this downloaded before anyone edits ticket history." Lena answered, "Already requested. IT snapshots in progress." That was the second piece of good news. Somebody was moving faster than the cleanup instinct. At 6:14 a.m., the shift superintendent reached Line 4 with operations and security behind him, took in the taped perimeter, and asked for a 30-second brief. Lena gave it flat. "Unauthorized bridge across faulted guard loop terminals. Safety relay falsely satisfied. Press cycled under misfeed condition. Tooling fracture with fragment injury." The superintendent looked at Voss and said, "Did you authorize a bypass?" Voss tried to hold managerial tone, but his voice had lost structure. "Temporary diagnostic bridge during startup recovery." Kelly heard the wording and felt the same cold anger she had felt at the bench. "Diagnostic did not put a man on a stretcher," Lena answered for the record. "Bridge installed while production sequence active. That is not diagnostics." She turned to Kelly. "You documented pre-event fault?" Kelly held out her phone. Photos at 5:41 and 5:42, plus message to EHS at 5:49. Lena took screenshots into the incident folder and said, "Keep originals. Don't delete anything." By 6:32 a.m., corporate risk was on speaker in the maintenance office while Kelly sat at the end of the table with a paper cup of water she had not touched. The call opened with the standard script: time, location, injured worker status, line state, and then moved straight to exposure. "Any indication of intentional safeguard defeat?" the risk manager asked. Lena did not hedge. "Yes. Visual confirmation, video confirmation, witness confirmation." The line went quiet for 2 beats, then came back with legal on bridge. "Freeze all logs. preserve physical evidence. No component changes until adjuster and regulator release. Kelly watched Voss in profile across the room. He kept tapping his thumb against the edge of his tablet in a fast repeating rhythm that looked like a metronome for panic. At 7:05 a.m., hospital intake called plant security with a status update that moved through the same chain as every hard incident. Security to HR, HR to operations, operations to EHS. Mateo was in surgery, condition critical but stable, and expected to remain admitted. Kelly heard the words from Lena, not from a broadcast, and sat down hard on the nearest stool when they landed. Stable was not comfort, but it was survival. She had trained him on feeder etiquette and hand position and restart discipline, and now she had to picture him under operating lights because one manager had decided a red LED was negotiable. The technical teardown started at 7:40 with power isolated, clutch block pinned, and tooling team in face shields. Kelly stood outside the marked zone and listened as each finding came out loud for the recorder. Upper die shoe cracked through 2 insert pockets. 3 carbide inserts fractured. Guidepost on station 2, bent outside tolerance. Feed throat guarding pitted by internal fragment strike. Then they checked the press frame with die penetrant around the right upright where impact loads travel when a hit goes off axis. The inspector wiped, sprayed, waited, then swore under his breath in the mild way veteran inspectors did when they saw expensive truth. A hairline crack traced along the fillet and opened under magnification. "Frame damage," he said, "not cosmetic." That single sentence changed downtime from swap die and recover to shut the cell and call OEM. By 8:20 a.m., finance had stopped asking whether Line 4 could run second shift and started asking what else would slip with Line 4 dark. The first pass number came from tooling. $1.1 million for the destroyed die set and insert package. Maintenance added $640,000 for ram jib replacement, clutch inspection, and frame assessment mobilization. Facilities added conveyor and guarding rebuild. Procurement added expedited freight for replacement tooling. Every department had a number. None of them were small. Kelly sat in the back of the conference room while an analyst built a live spreadsheet on the wall and watched the total climb in increments that looked abstract until someone said, "That's this quarter's margin on one product family." The room went quiet again. And this time, nobody pretended it was a nuisance event. The paperwork consequence that had started before impact arrived next. At 9:03, IT compliance projected the maintenance log timeline and the camera timeline side by side. The log entry at 5:55 read sensor anomaly and temporary diagnostic bridge staged for continuity confirmation. The video at 6:01:15 showed Voss clipping the jumper. Then at 6:02:29, directing stroke under production setup with strip and feed path. The mismatch was clean, binary, and fatal to any defense built on misunderstanding. Legal circled it immediately. "This creates willful exposure," counsel said, "not just incident exposure." Jalen called in to confirm, repeated what he had said on the floor. "I refuse to certify operation with a jump." His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. At 10:11 a.m., the state safety regulator returned Lena's mandatory hospitalization report and issued a same-day site visit notice. The official on the phone asked 3 direct questions. Was a safeguard bypassed? Who authorized it? And were records altered to mask operational intent? Lena answered all three with timestamps and witness names. Kelly recognized the dynamic in the room then. The event had crossed from internal discipline into external jurisdiction. Once regulators entered, narrative control narrowed to facts, artifacts, and recorded statements. Voss asked if he should prepare a contextual statement about production pressure, and legal told him to stop speaking on open channels and wait for counsel. For the first time that morning, he looked less like a manager and more like a defendant who had just noticed the door lock. 3 days later, when the shock cycle gave way to arithmetic, the plant held a second review with corporate insurance, outside adjusters, and the OEM press engineer on video. Kelly was asked to walk sequence from first chatter to impact, and she did it in 32 steps with times attached. The adjuster asked to see the relay module and jumper lead and evidence bags, then asked for raw camera export, not clipped footage. By noon, he gave a preliminary coverage position that hit the room harder than the first damage estimate. Major portions of property loss were reserved pending determination of intentional safeguard defeat and falsified operational records. In plain language, the carrier was preparing to deny significant claims. Finance recalculated with that assumption, and the updated model put direct and indirect exposure above $4.8 million before customer penalties finished posting. By the second week of October, the shutdown calendar had hardened at 19 days, not because anyone lacked urgency, but because cracked frames do not respond to urgency. The OEM required stress checks, alignment verification, and certified weld remediation before restart authorization. Downstream assembly lines ran partial schedules, then idle windows. 2 customer chargebacks landed for missed delivery commitments, and procurement paid premium rates to source substitute panels from an outside stamper. The bonus dashboard that had driven the first argument now showed the opposite truth in red cells and negative variance notes. A 40-minute shortcut had become a month of operational drag. The human cost continued on a different clock. HR briefed that Mateo would need extended rehabilitation and that workers' compensation had opened a lifetime medical reserve model due to long-term functional uncertainty in his shoulder. Kelly heard that in the same room where she had once argued over startup sequence and felt the moral geometry of the whole event lock into place. Tooling could be rebuilt. Schedules could be renegotiated. A body carried different math. Regulatory findings arrived in layers. The initial citation package flagged failure to maintain guard circuit integrity, unauthorized bypass of safety devices, and inadequate supervisory compliance with lockout and restart policy. The language escalated from serious to willful once the log discrepancy and video sequence were formally attached. Legal exposure followed the same curve. State prosecutors opened a negligence review tied to supervisory decisions and record falsification, and corporate counsel issued document hold notices across operations, maintenance, HR, and IT. Kelly received hers by email with a list of preserved items that included her photos, text threads, and refusal statements. She read it twice, then forwarded it to her union representative with one line. Everything I warned about is now evidence. Voss was removed from floor authority pending investigation within 24 hours and terminated for cause after internal findings were finalized. The termination memo did not mention personality or style. It listed acts, ordered restart under active safety fault, directed unauthorized bypass, mischaracterized bypass in official log context, and proceeded despite qualified refusal. The distinction mattered to Kelly. Plants could survive harsh managers, slow managers, even rude managers. They could not survive supervisors who treated interlocks like optional paperwork. When the insurer's formal position letter finally hit, it mirrored what the adjuster had signaled. Coverage granted for limited emergency response and selected collateral damage, denial or sublimit application on major equipment loss tied to intentional safety defeat and misrepresentation. Finance circulated the impact in a controlled distribution, but numbers leaked the way numbers always leaked. Saved schedule time, roughly 40 minutes. Confirmed direct and immediate loss, $4.8 million. Long tail loss still open. Legal fees, increased premiums, chargebacks, retraining downtime, and reserve obligations. Kelly returned to line 4 before restart. Stood at the same cabinet where the red LED had first latched, and watched Lena remove the old relay for evidence replacement under witness sign-off. The new harness had proper bend radius, fresh clamps, and torque-marked terminals. Procedures had not changed. Enforcement had. She signed her statement one final time that afternoon and initialed each page where her refusal was quoted verbatim. The page did not carry drama. It carried sequence, fault observed, mechanism explained, order refused, bypass installed, injury occurred. That was rational reckoning in its pure form. Not revenge, not rhetoric, just cause and effect tallied until nobody could pretend confusion anymore. The maintenance conference room still smelled like dry erase marker and burnt coffee when Dana from HR walked in with a folder under her arm and a face that had aged 10 years since the dawn call. Kelly was still seated at the end of the table with Lena and her union representative, and the final page of her statement lay in front of her with the ink barely dry. Dana set the folder down, looked directly at Kelly, and said, "I need a corrected record read into the file. The 546 suspension call was processed on incomplete facts. Your refusal is reclassified as protected safety stop. Effective immediately, suspension is void, badge restored, and back pay approved." She slid a printed notice across the table with signatures from HR, legal, and operations. "You should have had this language the same morning. You didn't. That failure is on us." Kelly read every line before she touched the pen. She signed acknowledgement, then passed the paper to her rep. Dana stayed standing. "There is one more thing," she said. "You asked during intake whether EHS had been copied. That question is now in the transcript, and it matters. Thank you for asking it when you did." At 3:10 p.m., Lena opened the evidence locker with security present and called out each item while a camera recorded. Item 01, relay module removed under seal. Item 02, jumper lead with alligator clips. Item 03, terminal strip segment including position 14. Item 04, harness section at hinge radius. Item 05, conduit clamp from lower bracket. Kelly stood 6 feet back and listened as serial numbers were read into chain of custody forms. Jalen came in with an IT analyst carrying a write once drive. "Meter log export," he said, placing it on the counter. "Raw continuity drop events unedited." The analyst added, "Camera archive hash verified, no frame loss." Lena nodded. "All physicals go to regulator lab tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Digitals mirrored to legal hold and insurer portal tonight." The maintenance clerk, who had hesitated at 5:55, appeared in the doorway and cleared his throat. He looked at Kelly first, then Lena. "I need to amend my note," he said quietly. "I wrote diagnostic bridge staged because I was told to. It was active for production. I didn't add maintenance objection. That was wrong. Lena handed him a supplemental statement form. Write exactly what you saw and who instructed phrasing. He took the form with shaking hands and sat at the side desk until every line was complete. 2 days later, the regulator's field investigator, Marisol Kent, stood by the sealed cabinet on line 4 with a tablet and a steel-toed boot braced against the pedestal base where Mateo had fallen. She replayed synchronized feeds on screen. Cabinet view, overhead aisle view, HMI capture. Pause at 6:01:15, she said. The frame froze on Voss clipping the jumper. Pause at 6:02:03, first inch cycle, she advanced. Pause at 6:02:21, crossfeed visible, she advanced again. Pause at 6:02:29, stroke command held. Then she looked up at Kelly. You reported light curtain behavior as muted under bypass. Show me how you knew. Kelly walked to the operator station, pointed to the status line and mode path, and explained the permissive logic in plain language. In normal sequence, interruption blocks command. Here, the bridged loop made guard status read healthy even while supervision was defeated. The screen looked compliant because the jumper manufactured agreement. Marisol made a note and asked one final question. Any unresolved witness contradiction? Lena answered. None. We had one clerical omission. Supplemental filed same day. That afternoon, hospital rehab allowed a brief video call from Mateo's room. His right shoulder was braced, and his voice came softer than before, but steady. Lena asked if he wanted his statement recorded now or after therapy. Mateo glanced at Kelly on the screen and said, Now. He described the 11mm misalignment, the hesitation at the command, and Voss's repeated order. One more stroke. Then he paused and swallowed. I looked at Kelly when he put me on station because I wanted her to tell me not to do it. She did tell me, just not with words I could hide behind. He shifted in the bed, winced, and kept going. I thought following management would protect my job. It didn't protect anything. Kelly did not speak until he finished. Then she said, You told the truth in the room that mattered. Keep doing that. The internal disciplinary hearing happened in Plant B's training auditorium, converted for legal record with microphones, timestamp monitors, and 3 rows of observers from operations, maintenance, EHS, and corporate risk. Voss sat with counsel at a narrow table, no tablet this time. The panel chair read findings in a monotone that made each line heavier. Count 1, ordered restart under active safety fault, sustained. Count 2, directed unauthorized bypass of safeguard, sustained. Count 3, mischaracterized operational bypass in official records, sustained. Count 4, retaliatory suspension request against safety refusal, sustained. She turned a page. Employment terminated for cause effective immediately. Voss's counsel asked to preserve appeal rights. The chair answered, Rights preserved per policy. Site access revoked as of this notice. Security waited by the side door, not close enough to provoke, close enough to end debate. The state misdemeanor hearing took place 5 months later in a county courtroom that smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant. Kelly sat behind the prosecutor with Lena and Jalen. The judge reviewed the plea agreement, then looked over reading glasses at Voss. You held supervisory authority over a high-energy machine and chose to defeat a safeguard designed to prevent exactly this injury. This court accepts the plea on safety violations. He imposed probation terms, mandatory safety governance coursework, and the state petitioned successfully for a 5-year bar on holding supervisory responsibility in regulated industrial operations. No dramatic outburst followed. Just the scrape of chair legs and the clerk stamping paperwork that would follow him longer than any quarterly metric ever had. The insurer's final coverage conference came by video on a gray Tuesday at 9 a.m. Finance, legal, and risk attended from headquarters. Kelly and Lena joined from the plant war room. The adjuster read from the determination letter. Emergency medical response and limited collateral repairs approved. Major equipment and tooling loss denied under intentional safeguard defeat and material misrepresentation exclusions. Finance asked if any reconsideration lane remained. The adjuster answered, "Not on these facts." He cited Exhibit 12, the jumper lead, Exhibit 04, the cracked harness, Exhibit 03, heat damage at Terminal 14, synchronized video, and the amended clerk statement. Every flagged detail from that morning had turned into a numbered line item. Nothing was floating anymore. Nothing was anecdotal. On the first restart day after remediation, Line 4 opened at half speed under a revised protocol Kelly and Lena co-led. 20 operators from 3 shifts stood in a semicircle while Kelly held up a retired relay module in a clear training box. "This red LED was not drama," she said. "It was a verdict delivered early enough to prevent harm. We ignored it once. We do not ignore it again." She walked them through the physical artifacts, the loose conduit clamp that polished paint to bare metal, the cracked insulation at hinge radius, the brown halo on Terminal 14, and the anti-tie-down timing window that no manager could shorten by argument. Then she had each trainee run the refusal script out loud, one by one, until it sounded normal. Fault identified, mechanism stated, restart declined, escalation path invoked. At noon break, Dana found Kelly by the vending machines and handed her a sealed envelope. "Formal reinstatement packet," she said. "Back pay posted this morning. Also included is your appointment letter, co-lead, Plant Safety Retraining Committee." Kelly opened the envelope, read the first page, and gave a short nod. "I'll take the role," she said. Dana exhaled, relieved. "Good. We need people who won't bend words when the floor gets loud." Late that afternoon, Lena closed the last open thread in the incident tracker. She read each status line as she clicked. Hospital report archived. Workers' compensation reserve established. Regulator corrective action plan accepted. Prosecutor disposition entered. Insurer decision logged. Evidence release order received. The physical evidence disposition was final. Relay harness terminal segment and clamp retained in regulator archive for statutory period. Jumper lead transferred as court exhibit. Then scheduled for destruction after appeal window. Digital evidence remained on legal hold. No unresolved contacts, no unanswered reports. As shift changed, Kelly stood by the guarding rail where Voss had leaned weeks earlier and listened to the press run a controlled cycle at reduced rate. The flywheel tone rose clean, the clutch engaged on command, and the ram descended only when the system had earned permission. Jalen passed behind her and tapped the rail once. "Quiet day," he said. "That's the point," she replied. She logged out at 5:42 p.m., exactly 12 hours after the first insult that started the chain, and entered one final note in the training file. He tried to save 40 minutes and protect a bonus. Reality charged $4.8 million, a criminal record, a 5-year supervisory ban, and a permanent injury to a young operator who trusted the wrong order. Then she closed that file and opened the next one, the case where a supervisor disabled a boiler low water cutoff because alarms were slowing production, and the plant learned the same law all over again.